back.
Thank you, Mr. Langworthy. Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
Yeah, I don't want to take up very much time. I just want to say that I don't want to be lectured about law and order from Republicans, especially on this day. But Mr. Raskin, I think wanted to respond, and I think that's an appropriate thing to do so that this doesn't just turn into a series of sound bites. So I don't know if you have anything to add. If you don't, that's fine. But if you do.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McGovern. Just a couple of quick points. One is that the killer that we're talking about would not be held even under the new law because he was never arrested. He was treated in Georgia, under Georgia's law, with a citation for misdemeanor shoplifting, but he was never arrested. And that's why there was no ICE 287G check done on him. He would have been identified and likely removed, according to the Athens-Clarke County Police Department, had that been done. But he was never arrested, and he wouldn't be arrested he would not be covered under this legislation. So it strikes me as just off point. But the gentleman was talking about the dangerous criminals that have been let loose in the land, and I think there are more than 1,000 dangerous criminals who were let loose last night who are in Washington, D.C. or around the country. I don't know that any of them are non-citizens. I think most of them are U.S. citizens, but that doesn't make us feel any better. So that is a soft on crime, soft on violent crime policy that was embarked upon the very first day of the new administration. So I suppose I'm with the ranking member in saying this is a particularly bad day for anybody on that side of the aisle to get up and purport to lecture us on public safety when there are Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, members of the Ku Klux Klan, 3%ers, and other marauders and insurrectionists who've been set loose without any guarantee that they won't engage in violent action again, either against public institutions or police officers. One quick correction to Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. It was not 140 Capitol Police officers who were wounded, injured, and hospitalized. It was 80, and then there were 60 from the Metropolitan Police Department, and there were police officers from other surrounding jurisdictions, including Montgomery County, Maryland, who came to defend us against the mob attack on January 6th. Thank you, Mr. McGovern.
Madam Chair.
Staff just gave him something, so I'll yield to him to...
Just to correct the record, ICE has said that Ibarra was arrested in New York City in September 2023 and was charged with acting in a manner to injure a child less than 17 and a motor vehicle license violation. So he was arrested.
We're referring to two different incidents. Okay.
Okay, but for being just let out, even though he was endangering the welfare of a child in the state of New York and let to go to Georgia, he would have been detained. Correct. And under this, he would be detained.
Correct.
So thank you, and I yield back.
Well, if I might respond to you, Mr. Langworthy, I appreciate that. If there are any crimes that are committed, violent or otherwise, by the more than 1,000 people who were released from jail yesterday, would you then say that Donald Trump is responsible for what they're doing? Well, that follows from your logic.
Not even, absolutely not entering this rhetorical question. People that have entered this country illegally and commit crimes should be removed from the country, period, end of story.
I thought you were talking about release from criminal custody.
Yeah. I would just, thank you very much. I just, again, without belaboring this point, but the reality is that the people that were released yesterday, I mean, one of the things that they can now do is go out and buy weapons. And one of them just tweeted that grateful for the pardon, he's now going out to buy a bunch of effing weapons. So again, you all own this. You all own this. I yield back.
Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I would just like to give credit.
I'm here to support the resolution to denounce the pardons of every convicted felon who violently assaulted police officers on January the 6th. And I would like to publicly challenge to a debate any of our colleagues who do not support this resolution, Democrat or Republican, in your district. I will come to your district, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues will join me too, to come and debate whether we should be denouncing and deploring these pardons or we should be backing them and supporting them, either openly or with our silence. Here's where we are in America today. I'm ashamed to say, in front of Mrs. Sicknick, Gladys Sicknick, my friend, who's Officer Brian Sicknick's mom, and Ken Sicknick, his brother. Here's where we are. They pardon criminals for violently assaulting cops, and they fire FBI agents and prosecutors for doing their jobs. That's where we are in America today. Brian Sicknick was 42 years old when he died. He'd grown up in New Jersey, the son of wonderful parents, member of a wonderful family. He was a good, strong cop who protected all of us, Democrats and Republicans, citizens who come to visit the Capitol, people who work here in the Capitol. And he was beaten up and sprayed in the face with bear spray and violently assaulted by Julian Cater and other insurrectionists who came to storm the Capitol at the behest of Donald Trump. Brian Sicknick died the next day after suffering 2 strokes at 42 years old. Now, in the immediate aftermath of the attack, as Congressman Don Beyer reminds us, Donald Trump did everything he could to denounce the January 6th insurrectionists. Like Mitch McConnell, like Mike Johnson, like Kevin McCarthy, they all denounced the violence. They said it was un-American. They said it was unpatriotic. They called it terrorism. They did that in the immediate aftermath because of the huge storm of public protest. But Donald Trump steadily began a process of trying to redefine the meaning of the events of January 6th, to whitewash the atrocities that took place that day, to cover up and to shroud in doubt the violent assaults that took place on the police officers, to make people believe that it wasn't Donald Trump's MAGA mob that attacked us, but that it was Antifa, or even more scandalously, the FBI itself. All of them lies. Donald Trump called the people who attacked us and chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," and came to assassinate Nancy Pelosi, patriots. They weren't patriots. The Constitution in 4 different places opposes and condemns insurrection. It says Congress has the power to call forth the militias of the states in order to suppress insurrections in Article 1. And Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which has been read into oblivion by the hacks Donald Trump put on the Supreme Court, says that anybody who swears an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution and violates the oath by, quote, engaging in insurrection or rebellion shall never be allowed to hold federal or state office again. If you engage in insurrection, you are not a patriot, you are an enemy of American democracy and our Constitution. He called them hostages, a scandalous insult and offense to people who've actually been held hostage. A hostage is someone who's been illegally abducted by a terrorist or criminal group and held for a financial or political ransom. These people weren't hostages. They were defendants who were arrested and prosecuted for their crimes. And the vast majority of them pled guilty to their crimes, and the rest who went to jail were convicted after having every measure of due process, including the right to counsel, the right to appear in court and to speak publicly if they wanted to. Most of them did not. The right to cross-examine witnesses against you, and the right to hear all the evidence against you. What made them hostages? What made them political prisoners, as Donald Trump called them, likening them to Alexei Navalny, who was killed by Donald Trump's filthy compatriot, Vladimir Putin, in Russia? What makes him like Nelson Mandela, a freedom fighter? But no, they pardoned more than 1,500 of them, including Julian Cater, who pled guilty to 2 counts of assaulting police officers with a dangerous weapon. He was serving a 6-year, 8-month term in the events
that led to the death of Officer Brian Sicknick. And now he's freed. More than 1,500 of them have been freed and pardoned by Donald Trump. And meantime, they are engaging in a massive purge of the Department of Justice. Firing prosecutors, firing the prosecutors in the District of Columbia in the U.S. Attorney's Office who prosecuted the January 6th insurrectionists, demanding investigation of thousands of FBI agents across the country who participated in the investigation of this attack on American democracy and the Capitol and the Constitution. So here's where we are, my friends. At the beginning, the first few weeks of the Donald Trump administration, they pardon violent criminal felons who assault police officers, and then they try to purge, fire, dismiss prosecutors and FBI agents for doing their jobs. And a lot of them Republicans, by the way. So what's the message? Don't participate in the prosecution of any crimes that you might think Donald Trump approves of. Don't get caught enforcing the law in a way Donald Trump might not approve of. That's where we are right now in 2025. But I want to say all across America, it's not just this brave family, the Sicknicks. All across America, people are standing up against these outrageous assaults on the American rule of law and on our Constitution. And like Don Beyer and like the Sicknicks, I'm keeping Officer Brian Sicknick right in my heart when I go out and I protest these injustices and these savage attacks on our constitutional order.
For his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of our witnesses today. The wrecking ball of right-wing authoritarianism is swinging right through Congress and coming directly at the freedoms of the press and the people right now. The self-appointed CEO of this operation is the unelected bureaucrat and aspiring techno-dictator Elon Musk, who Steve Bannon calls a truly evil individual, trying to create a techno-state in which he's king and most of us are reduced to the status of serfs. Break things and break things fast, Steve Bannon says, is Musk's M.O. De facto President Musk and his nocturnal Doge Muscovite Youth Brigade have now taken control of dozens of federal computer databases in order to dismantle entire federal agencies and programs that we in Congress created and funded with appropriations to keep our people safe and secure and healthy. Just this week, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the agency that lowered overdraft fees from $38 to $5 and cut credit card late fees from an average of $32 to $8 for American consumers, saving us billions of dollars, an agency that has actually stopped corporate ripoff artists from stealing $21 billion from us, got a stop work order from Elon Musk. The billionaire plutocrats want to dismantle the EPA, which protects our air and water, and the NIH, which promotes life-saving scientific and medical research. Yesterday, Donald Trump banned the Associated Press, a 179-year-old newspaper organization, from the White House because it declines to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. This is straight-up press censorship based on retaliatory viewpoint discrimination. Trump's DOD kicked out 8 news groups that had space in the Pentagon, but which asked skeptical questions of the new secretary, including the New York Times, NBC News, and the Washington Post, all ousted in favor of outlets willing to faithfully advance the party line of the state, like Breitbart and One American News Network. Mr. Chairman, I despair sometimes when I reflect how far this war on representative democracy and the rights of the press and the people has already gone and how far it might go. But then, Mr. Chairman, I confess I think about you. I think about you because you and I, a MAGA Republican, a conservative Republican, and a liberal Democrat, have always shared a common commitment to the First Amendment.
This gives me hope. As you've put it, quote, the First Amendment is first for a reason. Without it, we cannot enjoy our other liberties. So I tell myself that if things got really bad here, if we began to look more like Orban's illiberal democracy in Hungary, or Putin's Russia, where journalists end up in prison for their writings, and young people are jailed for expressing anti-war sentiments, and opposition leaders like Alexei Navalny are poisoned and die mysteriously in jail, or Kim Jong-un's North Korea, or Xi's China, authoritarian dictatorships where all must worship the orders of the dear deified leader, I will call upon you as a colleague, Chairman Jordan, whom I have known to work seriously across the aisle sometimes, to come defend political freedom in America. These are dark times, but in the past we've agreed strongly on the fundamental importance of free speech, free press, the right to assemble, the right to petition for redress of grievances, free exercise of religion, and no establishment of a state religion. I'm proud that you and I worked together to move the Press Act, which passed this committee unanimously and the House by voice vote last Congress, to protect reporters against compulsory disclosure of their sources and their notes. And you supported my resolution against blasphemy laws around the world used to torment Christians, Hindus, Muslims, and free thinkers everywhere. We have clashed vigorously, and we no doubt will continue to do so through this very difficult period. But forgive me if I quote Abraham Lincoln, the great founder of your party, who said, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break the bonds of affection." I hope we can call on these bonds if Elon Musk or anyone else in the executive branch seeks to destroy our constitutional freedoms and the powers of Congress. Although this hearing has been arranged to belabor a rather tiresome point that has been made ad nauseum for the last several years, it actually gestures at an important issue, specifically whether social media platforms like Meta and X should be treated as common carriers and pushed to be open to all speakers and all content, regardless of how dangerous or extreme or false it may be, or whether they should be seen as private speakers who have their own freedom to exclude any content that violates their own policies, the way that newspapers and TV stations do. It's a fascinating problem, but it's clear as a matter of law that there are private entities, that these are private entities and speakers who control their own speech, despite the fact that they are protected by Section 230, which immunizes them from liability for other people's defamation and fraud and other criminal and tortious communications posted on their platforms. The status of 230 is something we've discussed that we should seriously examine in a thoughtful way. Since the internet has clearly gotten off the ground and doesn't need this kind of subsidy anymore. But what I insist upon is that we be consistent in our treatment of the tech giants. You pushed them hard, Mr. Chairman, to remove objective fact-checking and to let all of the extreme right-wing forces get back on the internet. You pushed for an absolute and wide-open market in speech. But then you should push them equally hard not to censor dissenting viewpoints, whether they come from the anti-immigration wing of the MAGA movement, like Steve Bannon or Laura Loomer, who says she has been shadow banned on X by Elon Musk, or from the populist left, as when Musk purged his platform of journalists critical of him and other accounts critical of him back in 2022. Even one of your own witnesses today, Mr. Taibbi, was privately censored or de-amplified by Elon Musk, and I assume must walk on eggshells now in order not to get kicked off of that platform. But I'll be interested to hear what he says about it. If you use our congressional bully pulpit to stand up for the rights of extreme right-wing speakers on these private platforms, you should stand up for the rights of anti-Musk speakers to be on that platform too. But right now, the issue is this. We face a profound First Amendment crisis in the actions taken by this administration. One of my constituents who's serving in the armed forces, Mr. Chairman, alerted me this past Friday to book bans by the government at their kids' Department of Defense school, where they're closing the library for a week to complete a purge of books that appear to offend the new government orthodoxy against DEI and gender ideology. That's fine if you hate those ideologies, whatever you think they are, but this is naked content and viewpoint censorship of books. I hope you would join me in denouncing the purge of books, the stripping of books from the Department of Defense libraries or any other public libraries in America or for American citizens. When this father saw a school official removing not just books, but posters of Susan B. Anthony and Dr. King, my constituent asked why they left up the poster of Leonardo da Vinci, and he was told that's a real historical figure. More sweepingly, Trump and his FCC are using their powers to investigate, sue, and threaten news groups that dare to criticize the administration. Trump is suing CBS for $20 billion in damages because, check this out, he believes an interview with Kamala Harris produced too favorable an impression of her. So that means that I could sue Fox News because I think their interviews with Trump produce too favorable an impression of him. I mean, this is lunacy. And now, exploiting his asserted unitary executive powers, Trump is unleashing his sycophant FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, on every news group whose stories he doesn't approve of, actually threatening to pull the government broadcast licenses for ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, and NPR. Nothing of a hostile nature, of course, has taken place against Fox News, which is now the de facto state-approved media, enjoys immunity from the repression visited on its liberal competitors. What is this, North Korea? It reminds me of the treatment of Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former private lawyer, who worked for Trump for more than a decade and became deputy finance chairman of the RNC. He went to jail for Donald Trump for, among other things, lying to Congress and making unlawful corporate contributions in the Stormy Daniels cover-up affair. When Cohen was released from prison during COVID to home arrest and probation with an ankle bracelet, he was abruptly rearrested and taken back to prison when he refused to sign a statement saying he would not speak to the media or publish a book about Donald Trump. Everybody's got to hear this. He was thrown into solitary confinement where he remained until a United States District Court judge found this to be a clear First Amendment violation and an outrage and freed him immediately. What is this? Castro's Cuba? Putin's Russia? The free speech violations taking place now against Department of Justice prosecutors and FBI agents are equally astounding. The First Amendment forbids reprisal and punishment against professional government employees for political reasons. Yet Trump has fired and demoted dozens of federal prosecutors, many of whom he had appointed during his first administration simply for doing their jobs, including prosecuting January 6 violators. Trump's subordinates also asked for a roundup of information about more than 6,000 hardworking FBI agents who were assigned to work the January 6 probe, a dangerous, blatantly unconstitutional order which was enjoined by a U.S. District Court in a case brought by the Association of FBI Agents. The administration is attempting to do its work. I'm about to finish up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I see a lot of pages there. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I'm going to speak fast like you. Watch me do it, all right? Look, this is happening in secret. They're keeping the press, the Congress, and people in the dark. I know you feel strongly about government transparency, as you do about free speech. The administration's illegally fired 17 inspectors general, totally violating the statute which says they've got to come to Congress first 30 days before they fire them and set forth the specific explanation for why that's happening. Now, finally, you and I are both fierce advocates for the First Amendment and government transparency. Both of us see in the First Amendment a right that protects everybody without regard to viewpoint, substance, or politics of the message. And if we stand up strong for the First Amendment, if we defend not just the speech we agree with, which is easy, but the speech we oppose, which is hard, then we will be constitutional patriots and we will protect a truly free society. When we together introduced our Free Flow of Information Act, you said all rights protected in the First Amendment need to be defended. We had real success. Let's work together again to end the attacks on news organizations, to demand transparency from the administration, and to allow every American to exercise his or her free speech without being intimidated, harassed, or prosecuted. Thank you, and I yield back.
Without objection, all of their opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witnesses. Mr. Matt
Allen is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of my constituents have been illegally fired
by Elon Musk and by Donald Trump. One of them was with me last night, Dr. Lauren McGee, who is an NIH pediatric cancer specialist who is heading up a team looking into osteosarcoma, bone cancer for children. She got fired on February 14th because she was a probationary employee. Probationary not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she'd been promoted into the new job. And she was with me last night, and she had to sit here and listen along with me, and I'd spent the day with her, to Donald Trump saying one of their top priorities is to fight childhood cancer, and she got sacked on that Valentine's Day massacre. Now they want to censure the gentleman from Texas. Why? Because he challenged the president about his claim that he's got a mandate to cut Medicaid. And that's what the gentleman was trying to raise. Well, we've got Republicans in the chamber who have never voted to impeach Donald Trump for inciting a violent insurrection against this Congress, this Constitution, and his own vice president, who's never voted to even censure the president for doing that, and yet they want to censure the gentleman from Texas. Last night, Donald Trump, President Trump, called a U.S. Senator from Massachusetts Pocahontas, using an ethnic slur to go after her. So I assume that you really want to proceed to censure the gentleman from Texas for talking about no mandate to cut Medicaid, then certainly we're going to have to move to censure the president for using a racial and ethnic slur against a sitting United States senator. But I would prefer to stand by the tradition of free speech and even the tradition of heckling. You know, there's a fine American art of heckling. If you read the Lincoln Douglas debates, I recommend the Harold Holzer version of it because the newspapers carried all of the hecklers' comments too. And people would get up and heckle, and Lincoln would interact with them, and Douglas would interact with them.
The gentleman's recognized for additional 30.
Let's stop clutching our pearls. There's been lots of heckling over on that side of the aisle. I saw the gentlelady from Georgia heckle the last president and have a whole heckling section there. We didn't try to censure them or kick them out of Congress or anything. We actually not only say we believe in free speech, we believe in free speech. And we will stand up for people's right to speak. Now, I don't believe in the kind of heckling where you drown somebody out and you make it impossible for them to speak. But the gentleman was trying to start a conversation as opposed to just being spoken to all night. Thank you.
Gentlemen.
All right, well, welcome and thank you all for coming. The tirade we just witnessed is one more grim landmark in the spreading authoritarianism of this administration, and it is a brand new embarrassment to the once revered Department of Justice. It's fascinating that the president used the word BS to describe the case against him, which resulted in dozens of criminal convictions, because that was the same word that his own Attorney General, William Barr, used to describe his deranged claim that he had won the 2020 presidential election when Joe Biden beat him by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. That was the word that Attorney General Barr, even one of his greatest defenders, used to describe his delusional claims about how there was election fraud and election irregularities. No other president in American history has stood at the Department of Justice to proclaim an agenda of criminal prosecution and retaliation against his political foes. This thoroughly partisan and delusional diatribe was a staggering violation of the traditional boundary between independent criminal law enforcement and presidential political power. The speak we just witnessed is a desecration of the essential values of the storied department in every way. It's an insult to the thousands of professional lawyers who go to work at the Department of Justice every day to enforce the rule of law, not the personal vendettas and partisan games of a politician. President Grant and Congress created the Department of Justice in 1870, 5 years after the Civil War.
in the throes of Reconstruction. It was an exercise of Congress's powers under Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, which had just been added to the Constitution 2 years before. The purpose of the department was to protect the newly freed African American population in the South against escalating violence by the Ku Klux Klan and unrepentant secessionists. Congress wanted to protect the voting rights of the emancipated population against racial disenfranchisement schemes. Now, the Department of Justice, which first set out to defend the rule of law against white supremacy and vigilante violence, has become a department of injustice, cruelty, favoritism, and unfairness. One of Trump's first acts was to try to nullify the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which establishes that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a citizen of the United States. And they tried to destroy that, leading to at least 4 federal courts invalidating this executive order: an Obama judge, a Biden judge, a Reagan judge, and even a Trump judge. And the Reagan judge said it was the easiest case he ever had to decide. You don't have to be a lawyer to know what's wrong with that executive order or any of the other ones. You just have to know how to read. And that judge was very clear about it.
From the folks who are now running that critical department and agency. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Raskin, for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very kindly. Last Congress, the good chairman of the committee and the committee sent over 150 letters of inquiry and subpoenas to the DOJ and the FBI. That's more than 2 inquiries a week for every week that we were in session. All that breathless investigation didn't yield much evidence of weaponization any more than it led to the impeachment of Joe Biden, which was the express objective of it all. But I have good news for all of the weaponized sleuths and gumshoes out there on the committee. The Department of Justice and the FBI are now filled with actual staggering corruption and weaponized lawlessness, and we should get on it immediately. It's only been 36 days since the beginning of the administration, but we already have a thick report we're releasing today on the violations of law and the Constitution that have taken place, the early misdeeds of the Trump administration DOJ. It's true the federal courts have issued more than 20 temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions to try to stop this governmental crime wave, but we cannot maintain a demure legislative silence, Mr. Chairman, about the shocking weaponized corruption overtaking the U.S. Department of Justice. 10 days ago, 7 career prosecutors resigned in protest rather than carry out a corrupt and lawless order from the acting Deputy Attorney General and former Donald Trump private defense attorney Emil Beauvais. He ordered prosecutors in the Southern District to dismiss for totally political reasons a major public corruption case against New York Mayor Eric Adams, who had been charged by a unanimous grand jury in a 57-page indictment with 5 felony counts of criminal bribery and soliciting illegal contributions. Trump ordered DOJ to withdraw the grand jury indictment after Adams traveled to Mar-a-Lago and agreed to back Trump's political agenda in return. The interim U.S. Attorney, Danielle Sassoon, resigned rather than make her storied office a party to this profoundly corrupt bargain. She refused to extend prosecutorial favoritism towards a politician who had been indicted for serious bribery and corruption charges, nor would she participate in Mr. Beauvais' project to cover up the details of this dirty deal. Ms. Sassoon is a Republican with impeccable credentials in the conservative movement, for anyone who might doubt it, a member of the Federalist Society and a former law clerk to Supreme Court Justice Scalia, a jurist whom I know the chairman has repeatedly praised. Now, in ordinary times, we wouldn't have to raise this, but here we do, because we live in an atmosphere of political paranoia. This is a very conservative U.S. attorney who said she could not abide the corruption of the new Trump administration's Department of Justice. Her resignation triggered a cascade of further resignations as 6 other veteran prosecutors refused in their turn to take part in this corrupt bargain. The officials included the acting head of the criminal division, several leaders of DOJ's public integrity section, and the lead prosecutor on the case from the Southern District, Hagen Scotton, a decorated veteran, and another Republican with impeccable right-wing credentials who could not stomach the thought of joining this plot and said in a letter for the ages that I will submit to the record that it would take a fool or a coward to join this plot against justice. The next day, an apparently exasperated Mr. Bove demanded that the career prosecutors in the public integrity section volunteer one lawyer to sign this disgraceful dismissal order, or there would be a mass firing of all of them. One lawyer set to retire agreed to sign the dismissal to protect his colleagues from this outrageous threat of collective mass punishment, something that would be more appropriate to Stalin's Russia than the United States of America. This eye-popping sellout of public integrity and public safety in New York wasn't even a secret. In a Fox News interview, Tom Homan, the border czar, sat next to Mayor Adams and explicitly referred to the corrupt bargain, saying, quote, "If he doesn't come through, I'll be back in New York and we won't be sitting on a couch. I'll be in his office, up his butt, saying, where the hell is the agreement we came to?" Last Friday, the judge in the case at least provisionally refused to honor this dirty deal, instead appointing an independent monitor, Republican Paul Clement, to evaluate what should be done with the now orphaned 5-count criminal corruption indictment. Mr. Chairman, these facts are shocking. Blatant corruption, cover-up, mass resignations, threats, coercion. This, can you imagine what the Republican members of this committee would be saying if that happened under President Biden? If Joe Biden had done that for the corrupt Democratic mayor of New York City? My God. This toxic sweetheart deal demands a committee inquiry. Where is it? It's infinitely worse than any of the flotsam and jetsam the committee examined with the brainy intensity of Lieutenant Columbo in the last Congress. But the majority has asked no questions, written no letters, demanded no briefings, issued no subpoenas on this scandal. Why not? Why's the cat got your tongue? Well, this Adams debacle provides just a whiff of the raw sewage already overpouring the Department of Justice. They sacked dozens of prosecutors with superior credentials and evaluations simply for doing their jobs when they were assigned to work on the January 6th case. These people must get their jobs back under the civil service rules, which allow dismissal and discipline only for poor performance or misconduct, but the majority has not uttered a peep, wondering about how such an appalling violation of the law and professional ethics has come to pass. Why not? Last Congress, you investigated the DOJ for allegedly hiring and firing employees based on political ideology. Nothing came of it. Now DOJ has openly fired dozens of career prosecutors, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, for the sole reason that they were assigned to work on the January 6th insurrection cases. In other words, for doing their jobs in a case that Donald Trump now considers uncomfortable for him. How is that remotely acceptable? Even Trump said on January 7th, in the wake of the vicious, premeditated attack on our police and our Congress and our Constitution, that it was a heinous attack. He said the demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defiled the seat of American democracy. To those who engage in the acts of violence and destruction, you do not represent our country. And to those who broke the law, he said, you will pay. Well, the only people paying now after his pardons are the prosecutors and FBI agents they're going after for doing their jobs. Because Donald Trump thinks it's too much truth. In an act of Orwellian revisionism that would make Joseph Stalin blush, Trump's team wants to punish hardworking prosecutors and FBI agents for doing the job they were told to do. If this is not weaponization of the Department of Justice, then what is, Mr. Chairman? It is far worse than the imaginary things floating around last Congress that led nowhere. When will we have a hearing on what is taking place for real in the Department of Justice right now? They've hollowed out the career leadership ranks at DOJ, ravaging the offices that prosecute public corruption and terrorism. Now we meet Ed Martin, the new U.S. Attorney in D.C., who's already proven himself to be to legal ethics what Bobby Kennedy is to public health. He's an election denier who participated in the insurrectionary mass protest of January 6th, which he joyfully likened to Mardi Gras on the social media. And until recently, very recently in fact, into his term of office, he's been a defense lawyer of record in the courts for numerous January 6th criminal defendants. After taking over the U.S. Attorney's Office, he fired dozens of prosecutors, again, for doing their jobs, for prosecuting January 6 rioters. But DOJ ethics rules plainly require that he recuse himself because of this glaring conflict of interest created by his ongoing representation of private plaintiffs being prosecuted by the government. Naturally, the Trump DOJ forced out the senior ethics official, Brad Weinsheimer, who would have ruled on the matter, and replaced him with two inexperienced political appointees who apparently think it's okay, not just for the fox to guard the henhouse, but for the fox to simultaneously represent other foxes in court who have already ravaged the henhouse. Mr. Martin has literally made filings on both sides of January 6 cases as defense counsel for participants in the riot, and now as a prosecutor dismissing the charges against the same defendants he was representing. When will there be a hearing on this? This is taking place right now. The list goes on. We don't have time to go through everything that's already happened, but I would encourage the chairman to please check out our report. This hearing was entitled, Entering the Golden Age, Ending the Weaponization at the Department of Justice, a title that comes just in time to help us celebrate the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live. Well, perhaps the title's referring to a golden age for corrupt billionaires or lawless oligarchs and violent white nationalists, but it's no golden age for the Department of Justice, which is now mired in corruption and lawlessness, halting corruption prosecutions, disbanding the anti-corruption task forces, and purging veteran prosecutors and agents who are dedicated to public safety and have superior performance evaluations, but have run afoul of the new political correctness imposed on the department. Chairman Jordan has championed our power under Article 1 to ensure that the Department of Justice upholds the rule of law for all, without fear or favor. Good for him. I don't need to quote his eloquent speeches for you on the subject. We know them well. So I ask this committee to be true to our own beautiful words. Let's not use our oversight power selectively. Let's investigate these startling developments so dangerous to justice in America. And let's start with the dirty deal with Mayor Adams, which has now put a giant worm in the Big Apple. Mr. Chairman, I would invite you to join us in sending this letter today to Attorney General Bondi demanding specific answers on her shocking abuse of prosecutorial power, the shocking abuse of prosecutorial power that has taken place at DOJ in the whole Mayor Adams matter, and I would think that the committee should move very quickly to have a hearing on this next week. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Real quickly, Pam Bondi will be here for the Committee of the Whole, I'm sure, and members also will meet some of her staff and ranking people.
The gentleman from California essentially invited us to accept the deportation of someone from America without any due process at all, which the administration has admitted was a mistake because now he's hypothesizing that person belongs to a different criminal gang and engaged in other different hypothetical crimes. And obviously, the reason why we have due process is because we can't try these cases in the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives, but just reading from a court document here, Plaintiff Abrego Garcia is not a member of, nor has any affiliation with Trenta Aragua, MS-13, or any other criminal or street gang. Although he's been accused of general gang affiliation, the U.S. government has never produced any evidence to support this unfounded accusation. He has no criminal history. He's never been charged or convicted of any criminal charges in the United States. So who knows? That's why we have due process. This shouldn't be just fodder for cable TV. We're talking about people's lives here. Professor Shaw, what does due process actually mean? And should Judge Boasberg be impeached for saying that the Alien Enemy Act of 1798 doesn't apply because we are not at war and we have not suffered an invasion by a foreign power?
You know, the core components of due process are straightforward, right? And it involves some notice and an opportunity to be heard, right, to make some sort of case in your own defense prior to deprivation of life, liberty, or property. So that's in the Constitution. Due process applies to every person, not just to citizens. And due process doesn't look identical if we're talking about due process in the context of potential deportation or due process in the context of, a change to your Social Security benefits, right? Due process is deeply context dependent. And all Judge Boasberg has ruled as a preliminary matter in this case is that some sort of process has to be afforded before this potentially irreversible act occurs. Judge Boasberg has not ordered anyone released in the United States, has not objected to the detention of the covered individuals, has simply said provide reasons and an opportunity to respond. And
follow the law, right?
And follow the law. And it seems from public reporting as though there is real reason to believe that errors were made.
My colleagues are calling for the impeachment of Judge Boasberg. Has there ever been a federal district judge, a federal appeals court judge, or a U.S. Supreme Court justice impeached because someone disagrees with the content of their ruling?
We have no tradition of impeaching judges based on the contents of their rulings.
We impeach them for bribery or corruption or habitual drunkenness on the bench. Speaker Gingrich, by the way, do you agree with the Republicans and with Donald Trump and Elon Musk who are calling for the impeachment of these judges? That's a yes or no.
Yeah. I actually agree with Jefferson that impeachment is a cumbersome and difficult process, virtually impossible to achieve, which is why Jefferson—
So you oppose the impeachment?
Which is why Jefferson abolished 14 courts, because you could abolish—
Professor Shaw, forgive me, you remember the 5-minute rule. I've got no more time. It's a yes or no question, and I didn't get an answer from you. The Chief Justice Roberts has said that the correct response to disagreement with a district court decision is to appeal. I just heard Speaker Gingrich call this a judicial coup d'etat, and he said the Chief Justice should stop lecturing the rest of us. Who's right? Is it Newt Gingrich or is it Chief Justice Roberts here?
In this instance, Chief Justice Roberts. We have no tradition of impeaching judges. Appeal is the remedy for disagreeing with the district judge. Or if it's a statutory ruling that's wrong, Congress can respond, right? If it's if there's a bias or misconduct issue, there are disciplinary processes and complaints that can be brought against judges. You can seek to recuse or a remand to a different judge. There are many remedies our system affords if there is some sort of problem with the judge presiding over a case. But impeachment has never been in that toolkit.
Do you believe that there has been a conspiracy for a coup d'etat among 34 U.S. federal district court judges appointed by Presidents Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump?
No, as you said, I think these judges are simply doing their jobs.
The only comparable case I can think of here is the impeach Earl Warren movement after Brown versus Board, where there were racist segregationists who wanted to impeach Earl Warren because they did disagree with the content of his opinion. What happened with that? And do you think that he should have been impeached?
As far as I know, there were non-impeachment resolutions introduced at that time. There was rhetoric, there was critique. And to be clear, criticizing judges is absolutely healthy in a democracy. I am not suggesting otherwise. But this is already a pretty serious escalation to have seen these resolutions introduced. I really don't think they should go any further.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We now go to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, and I would ask if I could have 15 seconds of his time.
I yield back to the chairman.
Okay. Mr. Speaker Gingrich, I just have one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It must be tough to be an authoritarian. You promise everybody in the world to get elected. Prices will go down on day one. No more inflation. We're going to end Russia's war on Ukraine. The world's going to respect us. And then you get in, and even though you inherit an economy from your predecessor that's described as the envy of the world by The Economist magazine, you crash everything. The economy today is shrinking. The stock market is sinking. Inflation is soaring. $7 trillion in American retirements and wealth has been destroyed. You've plunged us with your imbecilic tariffs into a trade war with the whole world, except, of course, for your bosom buddies in Russia. So now, only 100 days in, with 100 unforced policy blunders, you're the most unpopular president at this point in your presidency in more than 80 years. Barack Obama stood at 69% in the polls. Ronald Reagan was at 73% in the polls. Truman was 87%, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, 68%. But Donald Trump is at 39%, the lowest 100-day approval rating since polling began. He controlled the agenda for 100 days. He controlled the House. He controlled the Senate. He's got everything going for him, and his numbers are in the gutter. So now he reaches back into the authoritarian playbook. Go back and please the wealthiest people and corporations in the country. House Republicans want to cut hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid, food assistance for mothers and children, veterans benefits, Meals on Wheels, Head Start, any programs that help actual people, all in order to pay for another gargantuan tax break for the president's billionaire benefactors. And here in the Judiciary Committee, our good friends want to help Donald Trump use his power in violation of the Constitution that we are all sworn to uphold and defend against enemies, foreign and domestic. Every day, the administration uses immigration enforcement as a template to erode constitutional rights and liberties. They round up people in the street and disappear them to the torture prison of a foreign dictator without 1 minute of due process, sweeping up completely innocent people who have no criminal record and no criminal charges, in the midst of other people who may have criminal records and criminal charges and should stand prosecution for them if they do have charges against them. They're stripping college and graduate students at American universities of their visas for writing op-eds that the administration disagrees with. They invoke emergency wartime powers like the Alien Enemies Act to fight a military invasion at the border while telling us that the border has never been safer than it is right now. My colleagues say all these measures are necessary to deport gang members, violent criminals, the worst of the worst. But they're not targeting the worst of the worst. They're arresting judges now. They're using federal agents to round up law-abiding members of the community with no criminal records, parents of American children, husbands and wives of American spouses, people who've not been shown to pose any public safety threat at all. They're breaking into cars to arrest mothers as their children's watch in terror. They're arresting people who are coming in for their citizenship interviews. They're staking out people's homes and trolling through IRS taxpayer data in search of tax-paying people to deport. Look, we know how to remove people from the country who should not be here. President Biden's administration did that. We know how to do it legally, consistent with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. But the Trump administration has discarded the rule of law. If he can sweep non-citizens off the street and fly them to a torturer's prison in El Salvador with no due process, he can do it to citizens too. Because if there's no due process, if there's no fair hearing, you've got no opportunity to object. And indeed, several American citizen children, including one with cancer, were flown to Honduras last week with no due process, as a Trump-appointed judge in Louisiana found. Now the courts have issued more than 95 preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders against this reign of lawlessness. But Republicans want to enable President Trump to keep going. This Judiciary Committee bill seeks to strip the courts of their power to hold an administration in contempt when the president violates explicit judicial court orders. And it doesn't stop there. While they try to defund the courts, they're forking over an astonishing $81 billion to the administration for more of these immigration roundups. The legislation includes a whopping $45 billion for ICE on top of its annual budget of $9 billion for family and adult detention centers alone. This bill is a blank check to the administration to do more of what we've already seen. And to make matters worse, as they race to spend more than $81 additional billion on this, Trump's own DOJ is terminating hundreds of millions of dollars in existing grants. They're cutting funding for county, state, and local law enforcement. They're cutting funding for opioid addiction treatment programs. They're cutting funding for crime prevention, and they're cutting funding for victims of rape, sexual assault, and violent crimes. The grants being cut support local police in solving and preventing crime. They help the survivors of abuse and assault. navigate the legal system, and yet they're being wiped out by the Department of Justice. They're also trying to handcuff the agencies that work to make sure our food and drugs are safe and our air and water are clean. The REINS Act is buried in here. It would prevent the government from enforcing our civil rights, protecting workplace safety, and guarding against misconduct by banks. It would require both houses of Congress and the president to approve every major rule from our agencies to take effect, virtually guaranteeing no effective regulatory action on any subject. They've also tucked the Midnight Rules Relief Act in here, which would allow Republicans to bundle hundreds of regulations all together into a single package and vote them down on a single jumbo resolution, which would be used to hide the most destructive deregulatory votes among dozens of others, completely burying it in darkness. Look, this version of an authoritarian America is not what the American people want. Please take note, this is why Donald Trump's polling numbers are in the gutter and an historic low. This is not what the American people are looking for. We urge our colleagues to walk back from the brink here to support many amendments we plan to offer today that will save us money, that will actually address the real problems of the country, and that will protect the constitutional rights and freedoms that we cherish so much in America. This is a test. Are we going to stand up for the majority of the American people, for our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and the freedoms we fought for, or are we going to stand with a president who wants to throw it all away? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you kindly. Look, as we race to spend more than $81 billion in this bill, primarily for ICE and deportation, the Department of Justice just terminated hundreds of millions of dollars in grants to groups working in all of our communities, cutting funds for state, local, and county law enforcement, cutting funds for opioid addiction treatment programs, cutting funds for crime prevention programs, cutting funds to support victims of rape and sexual assault. And this move is baffling. These are grants that support our local police in solving violent crime. They help survivors of abuse and sexual assault navigate the legal system. They provide drug addiction treatment services and overdose prevention services. They're working with young people. I'm going to submit some documents for the record, Mr. Chairman, that will help spell this out. Here's an article entitled "Trump Delivers Massive Blow to Youth Justice Programs."
Objection.
April 29th. Here is a letter that we all received from the Conference of Chief Justices in the state courts administration expressing deep concerns about the termination of Department of Justice grants to our communities. And I also ask unanimous consent to enter the record a letter dated April 25 from the Council of State Governments Justice Center to express profound concerns and strong opposition to the termination of Department of Justice grants totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. I raise this because, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I raise it because, you know, some of our colleagues, well, they've been quite inscrutable in their reaction to what we've been talking about tonight. Sometimes it seems like I'm in a Quaker meeting house or a mega mime troupe or something, because I'm trying to read people's facial expressions and their body language to see how they're reacting. But a lot of what we've been voting on are constitutional principles like due process and free speech and birthright citizenship. But this is something that really should unify all of us. And I want to warn all of my colleagues, Democrat and Republican, that there will be danger back home if you do not vote to restore these grants that have just been categorically cut. I've been so upset about it after I've spoken to some law enforcement from my state that I tried to track down where did this come from. And it didn't come from the House of Representatives. There was nobody pushing it here. As far as I can tell, it didn't come from anybody in the Senate. Nobody in the executive branch is identified with it except for someone who works for DOGE, and I see a picture of him in a bow tie. The name is Tarak Makicha. And Tarak Makicha is the author of the Excel spreadsheet that destroyed hundreds of these grants to local law enforcement in our communities, to local victims and survivors groups in our communities, to anti-gang efforts, to to juvenile assistance work and so on. And so I was just able to look Tarek Makicha up online, and this is a Doge employee. The bio on this employee's website goes back basically to Tesla from 2017 to 2019. They worked at Tesla in various roles, including head of strategic planning, Tesla Energy, chief of staff, North America sales and delivery, and global finance lead, working capital and supply chain. Most recently, they've been the vice president of finance and operations at SkySafe since 2022. They attended the University of Texas and so on. Well, look, this person has essentially dismantled a lot of the infrastructure of funding to combat crime and violence and to assist victims in all of our districts. And so this amendment is simple. I don't know that any member of this committee or Congress would be saying if this person had not simply wiped out all of this funding, we should be wiping out that funding. But this person did it. And that doesn't seem like a very sensible way to proceed procedurally. And I know that all of us are going to hear about it from people in our districts if you have not already heard about it. And I don't want anybody to plead complete ignorance. This is our chance to reverse the damage right now. And especially for people who don't want to get into gun safety regulation, this is money that goes actually to try to create peace in the community, to fight gangs, to get kids off the streets. All that money's being cut right now. And so what this amendment does, Mr. Chairman, is simply to restore all of these cuts that were made by this individual, as far as I can tell. I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from New York.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
I just want to emphasize a couple of points that the ranking member so eloquently made, and make sure that my Republican colleagues who talk very much about caring about public safety and caring so much about fighting crime and law and order understand that the grants that were yanked away from so many of these organizations makes our communities less safe. It makes fighting violent crime, gangs, guns, drug trafficking, much, much more difficult. That's what these grants do. These grants in various different ways, some of them go to local law enforcement, some of them go to local organizations that keep kids out of gangs, that keep guns off of our streets, that reduce demand for guns. These are proven to be effective programs. And it's not even just that we decide, okay, in the future, we're not going to fund these grants. It is actually grants that have already been appropriated, have already been obligated, and in some cases have already been spent down because they're in the budgets of these organizations, and yet they're just yanked away by an administration that talks so much about public safety. And we hear over and over, apparently, of the, you would listen to the president of the 5 million undocumented immigrants who came over the border in the last 4 years. I think the way he talks, it's got to be about 4,950,000 of them must be criminals or drug dealers or rapists, because certainly everybody I hear about is a violent criminal. Obviously, the data doesn't bear that out. In fact, the data shows that Americans commit a much higher proportion of crimes than immigrants do. But if you want to make our country safe, I think there's an expression, make America safe again. Isn't that one of the expressions? You would think that you would want to invest in programs in law enforcement that actually do make us safe. But once again, this president, this administration, and the complicit Republicans in the House are all talk, no action. Because if you truly wanted to put your vote where your mouth is, you would 100% support this amendment and ensure that our communities are kept safe by these critical programs.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, of course I will yield.
And thank you for that powerful statement you just made. My amendment would require DOJ to reinstate grant funding to hundreds of groups. Here's one of the ones that contacted my office, the National Policing Institute. And they have a program where they provide critical support to local and county law enforcement under the, quote, Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative. So they're able to take the money and put it into rural areas to fight violent crime. And they'd gotten the grant, they were expecting the grant, they were counting on the grant, and whoever this person is, not the House of Representatives, not the Senate, I'm not hearing anybody in the cabinet taking credit for it, but whoever this person is in DOJ, which sometimes fashions itself a fourth branch of government, just slashed all of that money. Is there a single member of Congress who knew this was going to happen? Is there a single member of Congress who wanted this to happen? And now they're going to be showing up in our offices saying, we had a whole program for fighting violent crime in rural areas, which is gone now. We had a whole program for reaching out to young people with an after-school program, and now it's gone. And what are we going to say? Well, we didn't know anything about it. I'm afraid at this point, we are burdened with the knowledge that DOJ has done this. And so I thank the gentleman for yielding. I hope everybody can support this amendment.
Gentleman yields back.
Committee, Mr. Raskin, for his opening statement.
Thank you kindly, Chairman Van Drew, and for your opening statement. This week's events show how MAGA has turned American justice completely upside down and inside out. Over the last week, we've been talking about a single rogue DOJ employee who unilaterally canceled more than $500 million in Department of Justice grants to local law enforcement and victims' rights organizations and those assisting the victims of rape and sexual assault across the country. That's what right-wing policies do. I would say to my friend, the chair of the full committee, we tried to restore that money. Nobody seemed to know how any of this happened, but our colleagues didn't utter a word against our amendment, and yet they all voted against it. What else happened? Well, a 33-year-old January 6 rioter who assaulted our police officers at the Capitol, and he smashed the glass pane through which Ashley Babbitt climbed before she was fatally shot by a Capitol officer, was arrested again yesterday. This time they got him for burglarizing neighbors' homes. This was a guy who was pardoned by President Trump, now robbing houses in Virginia. This Zachary Alam was serving an 8-year sentence after a jury convicted him of 7 criminal felonies and 3 misdemeanors when President Trump granted him clemency as part of the mass pardon of 1,600 insurrectionists and rioters for the thousands of crimes committed on that day. At sentencing, U.S. District Court Judge Friedrich described the testimony of police who recalled Alam as, quote, by far the loudest, most combative, and most violent of the January 6 rioters who attacked the police in the part of the Capitol that these officers were defending. And yesterday, the Trump Department of Justice agreed to pay nearly $5 million to the family of Ashley Babbitt, the rioter who tried to storm the House Speaker's lobby on January 6 after she broke into the Capitol and after the aforementioned Mr. Alam broke that window. The Department of Justice originally took the position that her wrongful death lawsuit brought by her family was wholly without merit, no basis, and that Babbitt's civil rights had never been violated by the police, and that the police officer acted reasonably in defense of members of Congress and in defense of Vice President Pence. A Capitol Police investigation cleared the officer involved, saying his actions at the height of the riot, quote, potentially saved members and staff from serious injury and possible death from a large crowd of rioters who had forced their way into the Capitol, into the House chamber, where members and staff were steps away. In 2023, then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said, "I think the police officer did his job." Now, although Trump's new attorney general is set to give $5 million to the rioters' family, Trump has not proposed to give a penny to the more than 140 police officers injured, wounded, hospitalized, disfigured, and or disabled in their violence, and nothing to their families. He's proposed no money payments to the bereaved family of Officer Brian Sicknick, an Army veteran with 2 tours abroad who died at age 42 here on January 7th, 2021, the very next day after being brutalized by rioters. The decision to give millions of dollars to the Babbitt family and nothing to the families of the police officers who defended this Capitol, who defended us, exacerbates the insult of Speaker Johnson's continuing refusal to hang a simple plaque in honor of the officers who defended the Capitol and the Congress and the Vice President. A plaque mandated by law and now more than 2 years overdue on the West Front of the Capitol. The Speaker's stubborn refusal to respect the law is craven submission to the executive branch, to Donald Trump, who wants to pretend that the rampaging mob that he sent to Congress was made up of patriotic heroes and that the people he pardoned were, quote, hostages and, quote, political prisoners. A hostage is someone who's been illegally abducted by a terrorist group like Hamas and held for a financial or political ransom. A political prisoner is someone like Alexei Navalny or Nelson Mandela, who's been imprisoned for ideological reasons, not for violently assaulting the police or engaging in seditious conspiracy or destroying federal property. But the administration's effort to create big news yesterday was Trump's acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey, a blatantly partisan prosecutor who has bragged about working to turn New Jersey red. Well, she announced her intention to indict our colleague, Congresswoman LaMonica McIver, on charges of assaulting, resisting, and obstructing law enforcement based on the now famous May 9th incident outside of Delaney Hall, an ICE detention facility in McIver's district, where she was conducting a scheduled oversight visit with other members of Congress, including our 80-year-old colleague, Bonnie Watson-Coleman, and the mayor of Newark. Well, Delaney Hall is operated by the private prison company GEO, a major Republican donor that gave $1 million to Make America Great Again, Inc., and has faced numerous lawsuits for its treatment of detainees and unsafe conditions. The members had a lawful right to be there and to investigate, and even after ICE initiated a scuffle to arrest the mayor of Newark on public property, the House members were let in to tour the facility to conduct nonviolent oversight, and the tour went smoothly. This indictment is a manifest fraud, clearly designed to distract America this week from the administration's savage and unpopular effort to strip 14 million Americans of their Medicaid and health coverage and 11 million Americans of Head Start, Meals on Wheels, and other nutritional assistance programs like SNAP. Representative McIver was, of course, executing one of the core duties of a member of Congress, oversight, pursuant to her precise statutory right to enter and visit an ICE facility. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that oversight is a central element of the legislative process because if we can't research the facts on the ground, we don't know what laws to pass. This, for the Department of Justice to charge McIver with assault is an outrage against the Constitution, which protects members of Congress from civil and criminal prosecution for performance of their core legislative duties. It is also a scandal in light of the DOJ's constant backing of cop-beating insurrectionists, including with the shocking policy that these pardons can even apply to criminal charges wholly unrelated to the events of January 6th. as well as the DOJ's jaw-dropping decision to fire more than a dozen senior criminal prosecutors simply because they had worked on the January 6th case. Yet now we've got colleagues who celebrate January 6th insurrectionists actually calling for prosecution of members of the House for doing their jobs. Representative Buddy Carter called our colleagues rioters. Representative Bishop actually said this was an insurrection. I didn't know that was in his vocabulary, but this was an insurrection, and he said it was a debacle worse than 9/11. No police officers or ICE agents were injured at Delaney Hall. No one died. No one had a heart attack like Officer Fanone did. There were no strokes. There were no broken jaws, no broken necks. Nobody was forced out of police work like Sergeant Gonell was. Yet we've got members of Congress who would gladly jettison the speech and debate clause, which protects all of us in our work, the First Amendment, and the Article I powers of Congress to score a few cheap political points at the expense of their own colleagues. In Trump world, violent insurrectionists and cop-beating extremists are heroes. They're martyrs. They're patriots. Members of Congress performing oversight functions are criminals and insurrectionists. And veteran criminal prosecutors of January 6 felons are fired, so Donald Trump can continue to pander to his private militia of pardoned rioters and insurrectionists and a reserve army of extremists who've proven themselves willing to stand back and stand by. Let me show you what a real assault on police officers looks like. If you'd roll the tape. Mr. Chairman, if this is an oversight hearing on ICE and ICE believes a real assault took place in New Jersey, where are they? Why are they not present today? The star of the show is absent, and that, my friends, is no oversight. I yield back.
Mr. Raskin is now recognized for 5 minutes.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shade, so you describe yourself as a son of wealth and privilege. I think you describe yourself as a legacy student. Does that mean your parents or your grandparents went to Brown?
Yeah, my father went to Brown.
But other than having some complaints like the beef mushroom blend, you're really speaking not so much for yourself, but for other kids. You say the kids who are not born on third base. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think the value of an Ivy League degree used to mean that you were smart, that you're brilliant, but I think it's being diminished.
And as you know, the vast majority of young people who want to go to college are not going to be able to go to Brown, even if you increase the class size as you've advocated by a couple hundred kids. The vast majority are going to end up going to, if they can afford it, state universities, community colleges, and so on. So my question for you is, will you use your platform here today to oppose the major cuts in Pell Grants, which have allowed an avenue for upward mobility and education for young people that are built into the current tax bill? 1.4 million Americans would be thrown off, and I just wonder if you would oppose the cuts to Pell Grants, the cuts to student loans, and the 80% cuts to college work study, which you know allows people to work their way through college.
Well, I think something that we've observed economically is that—
No, I'm going to, like my friend, I'm going to ask you to answer the question. Do you oppose all those cuts, or do you support them?
I guess I believe that that subsidizing education only increases the cost because—
So you favor those cuts. So you would just get rid of the Pell Grant program, is that right?
I'm not an expert on the Pell Grant program, but I know that generally—
You seem to be an expert. So you don't favor federal student aid to kids who want to go to college for Pell Grants or college work study. You're opposed to that?
I think that when students don't pay the cost of going to college, then we've seen prices rise.
Made yourself clear, and thank you for coming in for your testimony. Look, a point was made before that collusion is per se illegal, which of course is true as a matter of antitrust law. But per se collusion is only illegal if there is actually per se collusion. Now, this reminds me of a hearing that we did over in the Oversight Committee with Chairman Comer about impeachment, where the Republicans lined up all these witnesses about impeachment of Joe Biden, and then all of them said that they didn't see evidence, they were not aware of evidence that would justify impeachment. And so the two expert witnesses here, Dr. Cooper and Mr. Martin, as I'm reading your testimony, are saying that they don't have evidence of price fixing. Mr. Martin says, I think you just stated it, I'm making no judgment about any current conduct. You're not making a statement on that. Dr. Cooper, you said my testimony does not take a position on whether Ivy Leagues are coordinating their pricing decisions or whether they're in violation of federal antitrust law. So again, this is much ado about nothing. This is an attempt just to create kind of a propaganda smokescreen to attack the Ivy League schools, and your expert witnesses are saying that they don't have evidence that there are antitrust violations going on. And of course, they're correct, because if there were, the Trump Department of Justice would actually be engaged in prosecution or an investigation of them. So we have one champion of the working class at Brown University who is opposed to Pell Grants and other means for kids to actually go to college in America, where most kids do go to college, and two expert witnesses who don't see price fixing taking place by the Ivy League institutions. But there is a real problem in America. Only 10% of college students go to for-profit colleges, but they're responsible for 50% of all student loan defaults. And I'm going to ask for unanimous consent to enter a campaign statement by Marco Rubio entitled, "Trump University is an absolute scam. Get the facts about pending litigation," if we could, Mr. Chairman. But Dr. Morgan, let me go to you. How does the Republican attack on regulatory protections against for-profit colleges and universities affect the fraud against students taking place and the education market generally, because they are dismantling the regulations that were put in place to protect students against for-profit university fraud?
Yeah, we're seeing action both here in Congress and at the Department of Education that are dismantling or laying the groundwork to dismantle all of the protections that have been put in place for for-profit schools. And what we've seen cyclically over time is when those rules are pulled back, we have increased enrollment in for-profit colleges, we have increased debt that people can't pay off, and we have increased allegations of fraud.
Okay, and what about their move to abolish the Department of Education and to gut the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? Will that exacerbate the difficulties that young people are having paying for college?
We're taking the cops off the beat who can actually identify that fraud and stop it and put money back into people's pockets.
Gentleman's time has expired. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following article from Ivy Coach titled Ivy League Tuition and Fees for 2024-25, comparing tuition rates amongst the 8 Ivy League schools, and also an article from Ivy Coach titled Ivy League Admission Statistics, comparing the acceptance rates amongst the 8 Ivy League schools. I now recognize the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate...
Mr. Speaker, I'm moved by the comments of the distinguished gentleman from California, and I wonder what our colleagues think the value is, other than of a purely political nature, to a resolution that purports to be honoring law enforcement when it's set up on a completely partisan basis. I wonder what the value of that is. I especially wonder about what the value of that is when the majority doesn't even stand by actual law when it comes to honoring law enforcement. Because this body, on March 15th, 2022, passed a resolution to put up a plaque, a simple plaque to honor the noble and brave police officers who battled for 4 or 5 hours to stop a violent riot and insurrection unleashed against this chamber and against the Senate in an attempt to overthrow a presidential election. And so we voted to erect a plaque in their honor. That was on March 15th, 2022. It was supposed to have been put up on March 15th, 2023. We're now more than 2 years overdue in honoring those police officers, 140 of whom were wounded, injured, disfigured, and many of them permanently disabled. And several lost their lives in the days to follow. That atrocity
attack on this body. There's a law which says put up the plaque, and Speaker Johnson and the majority will not put the plaque up, which is why when you walk in the House office buildings now, everywhere, there are poster replicas of that plaque being put up. Now they want to pass a resolution deploring violence that took place thousands of miles away from here, and it's just a resolution, a hortatory resolution. They can't even get bipartisan support because, of course, they've got to set it up on a polemical partisan basis instead. What is the utility of that resolution when they won't even follow an actual law to honor police officers who put themselves between us and a bloodthirsty mob? And that's not a partisan point because the Republicans denounced it at that time as terrorism, as an attack on this institution, as intolerable, as unacceptable. And I'm happy to share with my colleague, who I know wasn't in Congress at the time, all of the statements made by Republican leaders at that time, begging Donald Trump to send in the National Guard, which he controlled because of the District of Columbia National Guard, and he didn't do it. He sat and he watched it, eating hamburgers or whatever in the White House on TV, ignoring all of the appeals to send the National Guard to come and defend Republican and Democratic members of Congress. And now we've got a law which says put the plaque up in honor of these officers, and they can't do it, but they want to bring a totally partisan resolution to the floor deploring violence thousands of miles away, and you've got members of Congress from California saying that they're not capturing what actually happened there. But no, it's got to be another opportunity for partisan division. Why? Why can't we honor law enforcement together and follow through on our word? I'll reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman.
Thanks, Senator Schumer. We're going to start with questions with Congressman Raskin.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin and Senator Schumer. Thanks for joining us and for your powerful leadership on behalf of the rule of law and the Constitution in New York and all over the country. Your citation of Senator Warnock reminds me of something that Ben Franklin said, where he said, I've observed that wrong is always growing more wrong until there's no bearing it anymore, but that right, however opposed, comes right at last. And so
Warnock paraphrased Benjamin Franklin.
Well, they were thinking along parallel lines, undoubtedly. Thank you for joining us. I want to recognize my Democratic colleagues who've joined us today: Hank Johnson from Georgia, Ted Lieu from California, Deborah Ross from North Carolina, Chuy Garcia from Illinois, Mary Gay Scanlon from Pennsylvania, and Becca Ballin from Vermont. But I just have a couple of questions for you guys. One is I want to say that when, pursuant to Senator Warnock and Ben Franklin, we get through this nightmare, and we will, and when we reclaim the trajectory of American history for democracy and freedom, and we will, all of you will be remembered by future generations for what you did to stand up for us during this time. And I don't want you to think that anybody doesn't notice, because we do notice what it is you're doing. But I want to ask you this, because in addition to the substantive defense of the rule of law and the Constitution you're engaged in, all of you are also modeling what it means to be an attorney general. Because we've got an attorney general of the United States who literally thinks her job is to be the president's lawyer and to do whatever the president wants her to do, and thinks that the Department of Justice is the law firm for the president and his political party. I mean, that's a remarkable deformation and diversion of American history. So although it's indisputable that all of you are Democrats, I don't think you're here to represent the Democrats or the Democratic Party of your state. And I just wonder if you would say a word about what it means to you to be an attorney general and to try to act on behalf of the rule of law and not a political program. Perhaps Attorney General Rowell, if you'd start.
Thank you for that question. I serve as the Attorney General of the state of Illinois, and in Illinois, I am independently elected from the governor, and by way of that, I serve the rule of law. I don't serve the governor. I do represent the governor. I represent the agencies within state, but I serve the rule of law, and I take that distinction very seriously, and I think that the U.S. Attorney General should operate with the same sort of she shouldn't be loyal to the president, but she should be loyal to the rule of law. That does not mean you're not representing the government and the administration, but you have to do so within the bounds of the rule of law, and we take that very seriously.
Is there any one of you who would describe your job as being the governor's lawyer? Exclusively, in any way, okay. So I don't know if anybody wanted to add anything else on this. Yes, Attorney General Campbell.
I'll just add, similar in Massachusetts, elected by the people, and I'm accountable to the people in upholding the rule of law and protecting their rights and protecting our state's economy. I would just stress, and I think the NIH case, which we were all a part of, whether it's the first case or even the second iteration of that case, to protect access to these critical life-saving medical research, clinical trials. This is billions of dollars that go to every state in the country. We came together not looking at, okay, how do we just protect those who are Democrats or identify as Democrats in this country? We came together recognizing the unlawful actions by this administration to cut that funding. NIH won quickly on a Friday night and mobilized to show up in court on Monday because we knew what was at stake. When you talk about a child having pediatric cancer or a vet dealing with PTSD, we don't look at whether or not they have a D or an R by their names. We mobilize to advance that litigation to protect the public health, not even only of those folks in our state, but to protect the public health of everyone across this country while at the same time upholding the rule of law. And I think it's just a great example of a great example of how we do our work regardless of political affiliation or even demographic.
Well, thank you for doing that. And Ellison and Plotkin, let me just twist the question a little bit. One of the things you guys are doing is defending the integrity of federal laws and programs that we've adopted. And because of the very restrictive standing rules that the court has imposed against Congress going to court to try to get our laws implemented, in a weird way, you're standing up for the laws that we've participated in passing. But that's for all of the people, because after all, it's your representatives in Congress who voted for them as well. But I wonder if you could just reflect a little bit on that role you're playing in terms of making federal law work for everybody in the country as a state attorney general.
Chairman Raskin, we regard the laws that Congress passes as fundamentally the prerogative of the people who populate this country and send members to Congress. And so for an executive to usurp the role of Congress in appropriations or establishment of agencies or anything like that, we view as an outrageous overreach that simply cannot be tolerated. As I noted in my comments, the things that the president is trying to do, you probably can do if you follow the rules, but you cannot do it vis-a-vis executive order or edict or proclamation or this is how I feel this morning. The fact is that there are procedures that they can follow. They got to go to Congress. You want to abolish the Department of Education. As horrible of an idea as I believe that is, you have to go through Congress to do that. So he's not only doing things that I think are harmful to the American people, he's doing them in a way that is harmful to our system of justice and democracy.
Great. And then finally, forgive me.
I was just going to note, Representative Raskin, that what you said at the start of this is the core of many of the lawsuits we filed. Article 1 gives this body the broadest powers, particularly when it comes to passing laws, spending money. And a bulk of the cases we have talked about and have brought have been the president. When we say he can't act like a king, it means he can't take actions that you have done and put into law, signed into law by a president, passed by a Congress, and decide on a whim that he wants to, say, convert a Department of Transportation highway program into an immigration enforcement program. That is not what the Constitution allows. And so our lawsuits have been about standing up in many ways for the authority of this body to do the important work that it does.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Judge St. Eve, Judge Scudder, thank you for your testimony today. Federal judges and state judges both swear an oath to faithfully discharge their duties under the Constitution and under the laws of the United States. Judge St. Eve, should a judge ever decide a case based on whether their decision would please the president or any other public official?
I could say in deciding cases, I look at the law and apply the law, apply the dictates of the Supreme Court, and that's what we are directed to do.
That's right, and that sounds like the normal course of business. But we just found out last week that a federal district court nominee may have done precisely that. Before Florida State Judge Ed Artow was nominated in May by President Trump, he lobbied for his federal court nomination at the same time that he sat on a state court panel that heard Trump's case against the Pulitzer Prize Board, which Trump was suing because he disagreed with their award of the Pulitzer to the New York Times and the Washington Post. And the decision in the case was about a very narrow question of personal jurisdiction, which the court ruled upon. But this judge filed a concurring opinion in which he reprinted lots of Donald Trump's bold and capitalized letters about what a fraud all of this was. And actually, not only did he reach the merits of the case, saying that Trump had shown that the Pulitzer Board had remarkably acted with actual malice towards Donald Trump, but the actual malice standard set forth in New York Times versus Sullivan should be overturned by the Supreme Court. And the court, he said, should return to the common law standard in England, which allowed for people in public office to prove that they had been libeled by someone without showing any intent at all on just a strict liability standard. Quite a remarkable thing. I suppose you don't want to comment on that particular situation, but would you think it's improper for a judge to be rendering a decision in order to please a president who might then appoint them to the federal bench? Could I ask you, Judge St. Eve, first?
I am not familiar with that situation and don't think it would be proper to comment on somebody who's pending for a judgeship.
Right, and I would never ask you to do that, but let me ask you, Judge Scudder, abstracting from the facts of this case, is I've advanced them in a compressed way, and you can check it out if you're interested on your own. There's a lot of news coverage about it. But do you agree with what I think Judge St. Eve said at the beginning, which is that a judge should never rule in a way that is designed to please a public official as opposed to enforce the meaning of the law?
I do agree with that, and I think you recognized it in some of your comments that preceded your question, and that is embedded within the oath that judges take is we swear to decide and resolve issues without fear or favor. The independence of the judiciary is enshrined in Article 3 of the Constitution, and we take seriously the duty that you recognized earlier, that Chief Justice Marshall pronounced in Marbury.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Can you describe briefly how the ABA ratings for federal judicial nominees worked before March of this year?
I can't. I didn't. I can't, honestly.
Let me refresh your memory. I don't know whether you went through that process. But essentially, the ABA examined nominees and their backgrounds to determine whether they were qualified for the job and also had the various met the various ethical requirements of the job. And that existed since 1955. When the ABA began vetting nominees and used the present-day system since 1990 for the last 35 years. So we had a system in place that began under President Eisenhower to ensure that judicial nominees have the appropriate qualifications. In March, Trump announced he was no longer going to provide the ABA access to the materials they need to vet the nominees. And then just over 2 months later, he nominated one of his personal criminal defense attorneys, Emile Beauvais, to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And we learned yesterday the White House approached Beauvais to ask if he wanted to be a federal judge after he ordered the dismissal of corruption charges against Mayor Eric Adams. So do you think
or would the Judicial Conference take a position on restoring the ABA vetting system, or do you think it's just going to remain agnostic about whether it should be dismissed?
The Judicial Conference, to my knowledge, has not taken a position on that one way or the other. That is outside of the scope of the budget process that I'm here to testify about today. I'm happy to take that question back or put your staff in touch with staff if you'd like.
All right, I appreciate that. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the gentleman. Isn't it an interesting coincidence that Eisenhower, the man who made a deal politically with Earl Warren for the endorsement and made him Chief Justice, is the guy that this started under? I would note, by the way, that I would likely get a 0 on a Bar Association endorsement for a judgeship.
You said Ike would?
I would get at least a 0.
Oh, but we would give you 100, Mr. Chairman. I don't think you have anything to be afraid of. So,
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from South.
Thank you, Chairman. I now recognize the ranking member of the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you very much, Chairman Van Drew. Pointing fingers is for losers. I'm quoting our colleague, Representative Chip Roy, from last week. And this has become a mantra for our colleagues in the wake of the devastating flooding in Texas, which cost already 132 lives with still 160 people missing. It's now an article of faith among our colleagues that in the age of climate change disasters, like Hurricane Helene, which cost 200 lives in North Carolina, or deadly tornadoes in the Midwest, you name it, in the age of out-of-control gun violence, whether in Uvalde or Buffalo or Charleston or Parkland, we should never engage in finger-pointing or casting blame or attributing responsibility to individuals. Although, of course, Donald Trump finger points and casts blame at Democratic leaders, as he did recently with Governor Newsom with the wildfires in California. But in any event, the point is, we don't really want to know which individuals are responsible. We should be addressing the underlying systemic problems like climate change, effective emergency response and planning, or mass gun violence and reducing access to military-style assault weapons, rather than vilifying people and casting blame on a partisan basis. Fine, let's adopt that rule. Finger-pointing is for losers. For this committee, no to finger-pointing, yes to problem-solving. But this entire hearing is nothing but absurd political finger-pointing. And it's not even finger-pointing at people who actually run our government or occupy public office. It's finger-pointing at not-for-profit groups like Church World Service or HIAS, Lutheran Community Services, and the reviled philanthropist George Soros, who has given away hundreds of millions of dollars to make the world a better place. I don't like everything that every right-wing, not-for-profit group does in America or around the world, but I don't think it merits a full-blown congressional hearing. We didn't even have a hearing on the richest billionaire in the world, Elon Musk, who actually had a government job running Doge, destroying large parts of our government, firing tens of thousands of our federal workers. The Republicans didn't even call in Elon Musk for a hearing or have a hearing about what he was doing, but they want to have a hearing in 2025 about George Soros, all of the old, tired, exhausted, absurd conspiracy theories again. And I don't see any, and these witnesses can correct me if I'm wrong, I perused all their statements. I didn't see a single one of them allege a single crime, anything illegal going on. They just don't like the things that he invests in. They don't like what certain not-for-profit groups do. Well, I don't love everything that the right-wing not-for-profits do. Why are we having a hearing about this? What an absurd waste of time. This hearing, if our motto is going to be finger pointings for losers, this hearing is for losers. Because all it is finger pointing at somebody who doesn't even have political power. This is an oversight hearing before the Oversight Subcommittee that's not doing any oversight on the government. Indeed, the Judiciary Committee has not yet conducted a single oversight meeting this Congress with a single government witness. Not one. They've not called Attorney General Bondi. They've not called FBI Director Patel. They haven't even called anybody to talk about George Soros from the government. They won't subject any of their government officials to any cross-examination by this panel. Now, I think this is an absurd waste of our time. Why are we not addressing urgent policy problems like the pervasive nationwide violation of due process and First Amendment rights by ICE and other federal agents who arrive now in unmarked cars, in plain clothes, without badges or arrest warrants, and then snatch people off the streets and send them to a torturer's prison in El Salvador. Do you think the United States House of Representatives Judiciary Committee should have an interest in defending due process? So my colleagues say, you're not for due process for guilty people, are you? Well, yeah, because we don't know if they're guilty until they've gotten due process. That's why due process are the two most beautiful words in the English language. It's what separates our rights and our freedoms from arbitrary state power. Why are we not addressing the threats to the security and safety of judges who are working to uphold the rule of law and now are subject not just to slander and defamation and signs all over Congress saying impeach this judge or that judge for standing up for the Constitution? Now, violent threats, not just to them, but to their family members. Why are we not addressing the mass firing of dozens of experienced crime-fighting federal prosecutors at the Department of Justice who've been fired en masse for the sole reason that they did their job and prosecuted police beaters, violent insurrectionists, and other rioters who attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021 in order to overthrow a presidential election in the United States of America and attack our Constitution? Why are we not having a hearing about that? We could actually have a hearing. Here's something we could agree on, Mr. Chairman, on a bipartisan basis. Why don't we have a hearing on what the whole country's talking about right now? If you turn on TV and go on the internet, why don't we have a hearing about the continuing suppression and cover-up of the information in the Epstein files, about a child sex ring run by powerful people? The whole country, not just Republicans and MAGA, but liberal Democrats are in an uproar because President Trump, Attorney General Bondi, and their allies in the DOJ and FBI repeatedly claimed in public that the Epstein files have the names of power elite actors involved in human trafficking and sexual abuse of minors with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and they promised to release all the information in the name of maximal transparency. You remember that? They said this would be the most transparent administration in the history of the United States. But now they're shouting nothing to see here, sweeping it all under the rug, steadfastly refusing to release the files despite broad bipartisan demand to release the Epstein files after everything they've said publicly. The Democratic members of this committee sent a letter today at 2 p.m. demanding that the president keep his word and release the files to the American people, and that Chairman Jordan call a bipartisan hearing where we can work together to get to the bottom of this. How about a hearing on that? Do any of my colleagues want to talk about that, or does everybody want to talk about George Soros? I'm curious to know which of my colleagues support our call for a bipartisan hearing on the Epstein files. So here we are at this utterly pointless hearing, spinning absurd, discredited conspiracy theories again about George Soros. And again, I don't see a single claim of any criminality or illegality taking place. They don't like the guy's politics. I can find you 50 right-wing billionaires whose politics I don't like. So what? What an utter absurd waste of time this is. And it's an attempt to change the subject, obviously, from what America wants to talk about now, which is why, after promising for all of these years to release the Epstein files, will President Trump not release them? And we know they were friends, and we know they hung out, and we know there are all these pictures together. We know that Michael Wolff, Trump's biographer, said he saw photographs of Donald Trump and Epstein with minor-age girls. Well, where does that leave us? That doesn't look good if they then cover up all the information. Come clean and release the information, as the Republicans have repeatedly promised to do. So I look forward to hearing if there's any allegations of criminality or illegality. They should be turned over immediately to the Department of Justice today. Otherwise, this hearing, I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, is for losers. It's about finger-pointing at people who don't have any governmental power at all. It's old, recycled allegations, and we're not advancing the ball on anything. At the very least, the Judiciary Committee should be demanding that the Epstein files be made public. That is a bipartisan agenda. At least I thought it was. And if something has changed, please let me know. But I thought that we were all for that together, and we should move on that today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Ronder. I now recognize the ranking member of the whole committee, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador DeBaca, is there anything illegal about not-for-profit spending money on a priority that a government agency or department also has? And I'll give you an example. The Gates Foundation has spent $30 billion to advance vaccines, both research and spreading vaccines around the world. USAID spent $3 billion over the last decade on that. Is that either illegal or unusual that you would have a convergence of the not-for-profit philanthropic sector with a governmental priority?
It's not illegal, and in fact, it is a best practice so that you can extend both the governmental and the philanthropic spending.
And presumably we could expect the same thing under R.F. Kennedy Jr., who opposes vaccines, he opposes vaccine research, he wants to stop vaccine programs, and presumably he's gonna, all of the same people that he just packed the advisory committee with will be getting grants to go and try to stop vaccine research. And as our colleagues constantly say, that's elections count. Elections matter, and RFK Jr. is in there. So there's not much that can be do about it. We can have a hearing lamenting it and bewailing it. I'd much rather have money going into promoting vaccine research and distribution than opposing it, but that's the difference between our two parties. Is there anything illegal about people in not-for-profits going to work in the federal government in a new administration?
No, sir.
In fact, a great example of that is this guy, Ed Martin, who was for a while the acting U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia. They were forced to withdraw his nomination when it turned out that his close friend is a neo-Nazi who dresses up like Adolf Hitler, and they just switched over to appointing him to a non-confirmable position in the Department of Justice, believe it or not, running the task force on weaponization. But in any event, he ran something called the Patriot Freedom Project, which is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization that supported January 6 defendants and their families, more than 100 criminal defendants, including people who violently assaulted our police officers, wounding them, injuring them, disfiguring them, permanently disabling them. And then he went into the government, and he's had close ties. In fact, he dismissed some of the prosecutions against these people, and they have fired lots of January 6 prosecutors. That looks like a really tight little revolving door channel, and it's not just him. In fact, they hired an actual January 6th insurrectionist who was convicted of crimes to go work for him at that same entity in the Department of Justice. As much as we might hate it, as much as we might think the American people should know about it, that the criminals in this soft-on-crime administration are taking over at the Department of Justice, it's hard to say that there's anything illegal about it, right? So if somebody goes from working at the Gates Foundation or the Open Society Institute at the State Department, is there anything illegal or criminal about that? Is there anything that should cause public alarm in the way these gentlemen are trying to stimulate it?
No, sir.
Well, in fact, is there anything illegal about the government, if it's spending funds appropriately, giving to organizations that other people disagree with? I think some of the witnesses were saying the vast majority of the people disagree with it, which of course our colleagues would answer by saying that's what elections are for. In other words, we've elected a particular government. Now I'll give you an example of that. I just looked it up. $434 million has gone in the first Trump administration, and I'm sure more will flow now, to crisis pregnancy centers, okay? Who, from our perspective, lure young people in and give them distorted or tilted information about abortion. And I'm sure that's what they say about Planned Parenthood. Okay, that's politics. People have different perspectives on things. But hundreds of millions, presumably billions of dollars are gonna go to the crisis pregnancy centers, which a lot of people think are completely objectionable. Is that illegal because some other people disagree with it?
It is not.
It's not illegal, it's not criminal. This hearing is just weird. It's just people getting up and complaining about things that happen under administration they disagree with when the administration they agree with is doing the exact same thing on a mirror image basis. But there's something that everybody here, at least I used to think, agreed with, which is let's release the Epstein files. That guy is a child sex offender who's convicted of it and then took his life before the larger trial could take place. His associate, Ms. Maxwell, is in jail for 20 years. The whole country is saying, release the files. That's what Donald Trump said. That's what J.D. Vance said. That's what the Attorney General said. That's what the FBI director said. And now suddenly they want to sweep the whole thing under the rug. Why don't we have a real hearing with real government officials talking about the government and talking about a real investigation with the real problem, which is the nationwide crisis in the sexual abuse of children and human trafficking? Why don't we do that? I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on the Judiciary, Mr. Raskin.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. McGovern, for yielding. The American people across the political spectrum are now demanding the release of the complete Epstein file. This is what President Trump and Vice President Vance and the whole Trump team was demanding up until the last couple of weeks when President Trump suddenly decided he wanted to sweep the whole thing under the rug. So there are now two approaches in Congress. We've got a bipartisan binding law which has teeth to compel disclosure of all the relevant material that America wants to see. But on the other hand, the Republicans in the Rules Committee just unveiled a meaningless, hortatory, fig leaf, Swiss cheese resolution that has no teeth at all. It doesn't even have dentures. It's all cavities, what they've offered. So we've got a choice now. We can go with a bill that would actually have teeth for enforcement, or a meaningless hortatory resolution that has all the legal force of National Chrysanthemum Month. Now, the original Massey bill asks for a comprehensive release from the Attorney General, and it's binding, which means if they don't turn it over, we can go to court. It's comprehensive. It includes everything from flight logs and travel records to individuals, including government officials, named or referenced in connection with all of Epstein's criminal activities, all of the entities involved. We want to know about all the immunity deals. And it even tries to deter and account for destruction, deletion, alteration, misplacement, or concealment of documents and records. All of that falls out of this fraudulent resolution they've thrown up at the last minute here. There's nothing in there except for a series of qualifying weasel words which are added to give complete unilateral subjective discretion to the Attorney General. Can I have 30 seconds more? To give complete discretion to the Attorney General to decide what should be in and what should be out. So it starts off by saying, whereas our resolution says all documents, records, and communications, theirs says all credible documents, records, and communications. Well, who's going to decide that? Attorney General Bondi, in conjunction with Donald Trump, who today said that a letter that he wrote to Jeffrey Epstein on his birthday, which is published, which says all of the indicia of credibility is not credible. That wouldn't be included. Let's release the real Epstein file.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, when I was a professor of constitutional law, I used to teach my students that freedom of speech is like an apple, and everybody wants to take just one bite out of the apple. Somebody doesn't like left-wing speech. There's a bite. Somebody doesn't like right-wing speech. Somebody doesn't like feminist speech. Somebody doesn't like sexist speech. And everybody just wants to take one bite. But if we let everybody take a bite, at the end of the day, there's no apple left. It's all gone. So if you want to defend free speech and you want a society that's defined by free speech, you've got to accept even the speech you oppose, the speech that you abhor. Now, Professor Kaye, we want to try to bring some objectivity to the conversation. I looked up the Reporters Without Borders rankings of every country in the world, according to press freedom. Norway was number 1. North Korea was number 179. It's like a totalitarian dungeon. The UK was number 20. The US was number 57 under Trump, down from 45, where it was before. Russia, which some people here lionize, was at 171, right? So if we were going to undertake a serious study of the state of press freedom all over the world, for example, where should our focus be?
I appreciate that question. I have a very long list that I could highlight.
But just tell us methodologically, quickly, how we should go about doing it if we wanted to undertake this in a serious way.
Absolutely. I mean, I would really use the lens of what do we need as a democracy in order to be well-informed, in order to make choices about our democracy, to make choices about our health. What do we need? We need an open press. We need open government. We need access. We absolutely don't want to see websites scrubbed, as this administration has done. So I would look at it through that lens, through the lens of what we need in order to have a democracy.
Gotcha. Mr. Farage, first of all, to be called charming by you, a man of your evident erudition and dazzling brilliance, is undoubtedly a Lifetime Achievement Award for me, so I will hold it closely. But I wanted to ask you about your commitment to the freedom of speech universally. I think it's a principle that you advocate for everyone, not just for people who are in your party or people you agree with. You said that there should not have been a protest against the Gaza war in the UK. And then when it went ahead, the police refused to shut it down. You called them gutless for not shutting it down. Do you regret having opposed that, given that there was no violence there and there were 700,000 people who wanted to express themselves that day?
I have not opposed people standing up and protesting in favor of people living in Gaza at all. There was one particular day, and it was the Sunday nearest November the 11th, which was when we had big memorial services in London, and I think a march being allowed to go ahead on that day would have been a mistake. Any other day, fine.
Oh, I see. Who gets to decide that?
What I think actually is something that is embedded in the country, something that is absolutely fundamental to.
That's why we have a written constitution. You might take that idea back to the UK with you.
Well,
because the freedom of speech applies 365 days a year here under the First Amendment, not 364 or 363, depending on some politicians heckling the government and telling them to shut down free speech.
We have allowed mass pro-Gaza demonstrations in London, weekend after weekend.
No thanks to you. All right, let me change.
This was one
let me try another one.
Sensitive day. That's all.
I got you. It was a sensitive day. And I thought that's what the freedom of speech was about. You have a right to engage in speech that other people consider offensive or insensitive. But in any event, you've made yourself clear, Mr. Farage.
64 days a year if they want.
You've made yourself clear to your constituents in Claxton today. Let me ask you this. You've banned journalists from your political events that you disagree with, haven't you?
No, in fact, I'm the only political
Really? At your convention, you didn't ban journalists and revoke their credentials?
You know, I take, the average press conference, I take 25 questions.
No, that wasn't my question. Mr. Farage, we're politicians, so we see what you're doing. I'm asking you a direct question.
Well, thank you. I'm very pleased
I'm asking
you
you a direct question, and I hope you can answer it. Why do you ban journalists who oppose your views from coming to your events? Why did you tell your party, why did you tell the local government not to do interviews with your local newspaper?
I am the most open person to any journalist.
Undoubtedly, you're the handsomest man in the world. But I'm asking you a different question, okay? That's not my question. My question for you is, and it's legit, why do you ban journalists that you disagree with from your political events, like from your convention?
I don't.
Okay, and you say you've never done that?
I can't think, if I go back the last 25 years, I can't think of banning anybody. But I mean, maybe somebody else did. But look,
I see. It was somebody else who did it.
I do more. I take more questions.
All right.
From journalists.
Do you have
all
any
the other
objections?
Leaders added up together.
Okay, Mr. Price, let me ask you. You're an honest man. Do you have any objection to the things you've heard about what Donald Trump is doing in the United States of America, going after law firms, for example, banning them from federal buildings and federal courthouses, stripping them of security clearance, saying they can never get federal jobs or contracts because he doesn't like something one of the lawyers at the firm did? Do you think there's a First Amendment problem with that, as our courts have found?
There's a lot of information you've put into that. It's good to talk to you again after London.
Yeah, have you followed that at all?
I haven't. I have to be perfectly honest with you now.
Okay, do you have any problems with anything Donald Trump has done with respect to free speech and freedom of expression in America? Or you just haven't followed it?
I'm not as well. There are plenty of people here better informed on American matters than I.
And we are. So thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. My guess is Mr. Farage takes press questions probably as often as President Trump does. These are two guys who aren't afraid to talk to the press and take any question that comes to them. We've seen that display time and time again. The gentleman from California, member for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Director Patel. You and I have not had the opportunity to meet
And alas, you failed to respond to the 8 oversight letters I've sent you over the last 7 months. So we do have a lot of questions piling up for you. But I want to start with a word of praise. The first FBI director was J. Edgar Hoover, who steadfastly refused to hire women, African Americans, and other minorities as agents. And although he was a closeted homosexual who lived in domestic partnership for decades with Clyde Tolson, he also participated in anti-gay crusades. He aggressively promoted what we would today call white Christian nationalism, and he would undoubtedly be turning over in his grave to see as one of his successors a first-generation Indian American and a proud Hindu. So I congratulate you on being a breakthrough in this sense and being a beneficiary of the civil rights movement that opened up the FBI and the federal workforce to lots of people who never would have been hired in its first decades. Alas, you share J. Edgar Hoover's dangerous obsession with blind loyalty over professionalism and effective public policy. For Hoover, it was blind loyalty to him in keeping his secrets. For you, it's blind loyalty to Donald Trump in keeping his secrets. During your confirmation, it was widely noted on all sides that your primary qualification was your unwavering loyalty to Trump. Unlike other directors, you had no work experience at the FBI, but you had made over 1,000 media and political appearances in support of Trump's campaign. Your Senate confirmation vote was 51-49, the closest in history, with your opponents warning you were not qualified and had no interest in actually developing the qualifications for the job. I hoped that they were wrong. Alas, they were not. While most other new FBI directors drew on their experience as FBI agents, you didn't have that. But you did write a picture book trilogy for children ages 5 and up based on your experience clashing with President Trump's political enemies. In your book, you describe your literary alter ego, Cash the Knight, as a wacky, easily bored wizard carrying out King Donald's vengeance by driving his enemies out of the kingdom. In the books, King Donald is besieged by the evil Hillary Queentown, but saved in the end by Cash. Then Cash goes on to catch mules who are stealing the 2020 election for the great King Donald from Sleepy Joe. And then in the third book, Cash takes down the dragon of the jalapenos, nicknamed the DOJ. Your supporters had hoped that you would graduate from imagining yourself a romantic fairy tale knight to actually running America's premier federal law enforcement agency. Alas, just as we've learned how dangerous it is to put a science-denying anti-vaxxer in charge of our public health, we've learned how dangerous it is to name as director of the FBI a man who thinks of himself as a fairy tale knight who keeps a fire-breathing dragon named DOJ at home to forcibly drive villains out of the kingdom. When Charlie Kirk was assassinated, while his killer was still on the loose, you decided you didn't need to be at FBI headquarters in Washington to work with your team while the chaotic manhunt unfolded. You spent your evening dining in a swanky Midtown Manhattan restaurant and tweeting out false information that the subject of the shooting was in custody, a statement you had to retract 1 hour later. Your performance was so disturbing that even the MAGA base was alarmed. Culture warrior Christopher Rufo, who just a few months ago sat in your chair as a Republican witness, observed that you performed terribly, and he called for your ouster. The FBI might be able to survive your delusions of grandeur and the explosively volatile temper that was on display yesterday in the Senate, but the intractable problem is that you are running the FBI not as a law enforcement agency charged with keeping the American people safe, but as a political enforcement agency working directly for the president's vengeance campaign. 7 months in, it's impossible to overstate the destruction, chaos, and demoralization you've brought to the FBI and its workforce and the resulting danger your actions have caused to our country. You've been systematically purging the FBI of its most experienced and qualified agents, division leaders, and experts in counterterror, counterintelligence, and cybersecurity, precisely the people who have the expertise you lack and which the FBI and the country need. They've been expelled from the ranks of the Bureau simply because they did their duty investigating crimes, including those committed by the mob that attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and beat the hell out of more than 140 police officers, or simply because you suspected them of being insufficiently loyal to Donald Trump. You illegally sacked Brian Driscoll, the
the former acting director of the Bureau, and a decorated counterterrorism expert who worked at the FBI for nearly 20 years. According to Driscoll, you told him your own job, quote, depended on the removal of agents who worked on the cases against the president, regardless of whether the agents chose to work on those cases or not. You added, quote, the FBI tried to put the president in jail, and he hasn't forgotten it. You forced out the leader of the Salt Lake City field office, Mehtab Saeed, just weeks before Charlie Kirk's assassination, depriving the FBI of an experienced counterterrorism expert described by her colleagues as absolutely the best and legendary. She would have led the FBI's manhunt had she not been fired. When Trump decided that rounding up immigrants with no criminal records was more important than preventing crimes like human trafficking of women and girls, drug dealing, terrorism, and fraud, you ordered the 25 largest field offices to divert thousands of agents away from chasing down violent criminals, sex traffickers, fraudsters, and scammers to carry out this immigration crackdown. Director Patel, you treated the men and women at the FBI with disrespect and paranoia. You've assembled a roving band of freelancing henchmen within your office and charged them with conducting unauthorized investigations, targeting and harassing career FBI employees. Amazingly, you forced senior leadership to repeatedly take polygraph tests to prove their political loyalty and pushed out leaders who refused these demeaning exercises. And now we're seeing one very clear reason why you want to build a political FBI. The Epstein files. You want an FBI blindly loyal to Trump and to you as his enforcer so you can continue your cover-up of a massive international sex trafficking ring with more than 1,000 victims, betraying all of the survivors of the sexual violence. Before you got in this job, you called for full release of the Epstein files, telling podcaster Benny Johnson that the only reason the list was not released by DOJ and FBI was, quote, because of who's on that list. Upon your confirmation, you promised that, quote, there will be no cover-ups, no missing documents, no stone left unturned, and anyone from the prior or current Bureau who undermines this will be swiftly pursued. This spring, you ordered hundreds of agents to pore over all the Epstein files, but not to look for more clues about the money network or the network of human traffickers. You pulled these agents from their regular counterterrorism or drug trafficking duties to work around the clock, some of them sleeping at their desks, to conduct a frantic search to make sure Donald Trump's name and image were flagged and redacted wherever they appeared, whether an email, a text, a letter, an interview, a photograph, or a video. In May, Attorney General Bondi reportedly told Trump that his name had indeed appeared multiple times throughout the Epstein files. And not long thereafter, in July, you and the Attorney General released a memo claiming that, quote, no further disclosure would be appropriate or warranted. In a few short months, how did you go from being a crusader for accountability and transparency for the Epstein files to being a part of the conspiracy and cover-up? The answer is simple. You said it yourself, because of who's on that list. Donald Trump's relationship with Epstein over the years is well documented. A week ago, the Oversight Committee released Trump's disturbing birthday book, Note to Epstein, written over a drawing of a woman's naked body referring to a, quote, wonderful secret. The Oversight Committee obtained the note from the Epstein estate, not from the FBI, raising questions again of whether the FBI has been withholding documents. While you're unleashing the FBI to cater to Trump's desire to shut down the Epstein inquiry, the first 9 months of the Trump presidency have seen a spate of political violence and domestic terror events. We saw deadly attacks on political figures on both the left and the right. The brutal assassination of Minnesota Democratic House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband, and the attempted murder of Democratic State Senator John Hoffman and his wife, who miraculously survived a combined 17 gunshots. We saw an arsonist set Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's residence on fire. And of course, last week, we saw the horrific, cold-blooded assassination of Charlie Kirk in Utah that has shaken the nation. 1 minute after Charlie Kirk was shot in the neck, a 16-year-old shooter in Evergreen, Colorado, radicalized by white supremacist ideology online, opened fire and critically wounded 2 other students at Evergreen High School. We've seen lethal anti-Semitic violence, including the murder of 2 young Israeli embassy staffers just blocks from the Capitol, and then in the attack on a gathering of Jewish people in support of hostages held in Gaza in Boulder in June. We've seen continued mass shootings at schools, like the domestic terror incident at a Catholic school in Minneapolis last month, which killed 2 children and wounded 18 others. And in August, a man fired more than 500 bullets at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, killing a police officer who was a Marine veteran and a father. People like Melissa Hortman and Charlie Kirk should be able to participate in politics as elected officials or active citizens without being shot down in cold blood in the United States of America. People should also be able to go to elementary school, to middle school, to high school, to work, to the mall, and to church without being shot down in explosions of gun violence. The important position at the FBI requires a leader who puts public safety and national security and the rule of law first. I'm afraid, Director Patel, you've given us reason to believe you've used the powers of the FBI to serve Donald Trump and his agenda of partisan retribution. You've broken your promise not to do that. You've betrayed Jeffrey Epstein's victims and survivors. You've turned your back on the career law enforcement officers of the FBI, and as a result, you've left all of us less safe than before. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. That opening statement may have been longer than any book director's ever written or anyone else has written. Without objection, all of the opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witness. Mr. Patel has been the director of the FBI since February of 2025. He previously served as chief of staff at the Department of Defense, deputy director of national intelligence with the National Security Council, and also as a congressional staffer, as a federal prosecutor, where he focused on national security cases, and he also worked as a public defender in the state of Florida. We welcome our yields back. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, before you joined the FBI, you railed against it for covering up Jeffrey Epstein's human trafficking ring. Let me refresh your memory with this clip.
It has Epstein's list. They're sitting on it. That doesn't seem like something you should do. You're protecting the world's foremost predator. That seems like an evil thing to do, regardless of who may be embarrassed in the release of that list. Why is the FBI protecting the greatest pederast, the largest scale? Why is the FBI protecting the greatest pederast, the largest scale pederast in human history?
Simple, because of who's on that list.
So you finished that December 2023 interview with a challenge to the FBI and harsh words for Republicans in Congress for not getting the Epstein files out to the public. You can see this clip.
Boy pants, and let us know who the pedophiles are.
Put on your big boy pants and let us know who the pedophiles are, you said. You emphasized that the president and FBI director each had complete authority to release Epstein's client list. You said Epstein's black book is under the, quote, direct control of the director of the FBI. Look at this clip.
This is way off the topic, but who has Jeffrey Epstein's
black book?
Black book.
FBI.
But who? That is, I mean, there's...
Oh, that's under direct control of the director of the FBI.
All right, so you were sworn in as director more than 200 days ago. Now the black book is under your direct control. So why haven't you released the names of Epstein's co-conspirators in the rape and sex trafficking of young women and girls?
The Rolodex, which is what everybody colloquially refers to as the black book, has been released.
Oh, no, you're talking about what the journalist got 5 years ago? No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what you were talking about there,
That's
the black
exactly
book
what I
under
was
the direct control of the FBI director.
We have released more material than anyone else before. The Biden administration, Obama administration had the exact opportunities to release this material, and they never did. And if you are selling the men and women of the FBI, we're not going after child predators. Hang on, you said we're not going after child predators. 1,500 child predators arrested this year, 35% increase,
I'll reclaim my time.
4,700 child victims
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to
found.
reclaim my time if you could instruct the witness. Why have you changed your position? There you were saying it's under the direct control of the FBI director and all of it should be released. Why have you changed your position?
Everything that has been lawfully permitted to be released has been released. And as I told you, the investigation was limited. And let me make something crystal clear. I never said Jeffrey Epstein didn't traffic other people, other women, and they're not other victims. This is the investigation we were given from 2006, 7, and 8, and the search warrants from 2006, 7, and 8. That's what we're working with.
Well, wait, have you released all of the stuff that the FBI has seized from Epstein's house? The computers, the emails, the file cabinets, the documents? What about the financial records? Have you released all of that?
Everything the court has allowed us to release.
Which court are you talking about?
3 separate federal courts have come in and said.
We're talking about the evidence you've got. It's got nothing to do with what those courts have.
Do you have any idea how the law works? Do you want me to break the law in a federal judge's order?
No, I want you to follow your own word, Director Patel. You said up there it was under the direct control of the FBI director. He had the black book.
Everything I have direct control over, we have gone to court. You haven't.
Complete your sentence. Everything you have direct control over, you said.
Have gone to court, and everything we have direct control over.
Complete your sentence. You said everything.
Release. We're releasing.
He'd like to complete his answer.
You began the sentence, everything you have direct control over, and then you stopped that sentence. You've released everything that you have direct control over?
And I have direct control over and can lawfully release. If you're not familiar with the court orders, that's not my fault.
Oh, I'm
perfectly,
look at them. I'm perfectly familiar with them. But how did we prosecute Ghislaine Maxwell?
She was prosecuted with the investigatory material that was collected from 2001 and 2005. Because of the non-prosecution agreements and the court orders on the investigations and search warrants, we were not able to develop new information. And oh, by the way, Jeffrey Epstein was out for 12 years, and the Obama and Biden administration did nothing to look at his work, his pedophile network. If you want to blame me, that's fine. But now you're blaming the men and women who conducted this great search.
Stop that. I'm not blaming anybody other than you. You're not keeping your word. You said that you would release all of the materials under your direct control.
Has anyone released more information on Epstein than I have? Has anyone?
Much more.
Did Comey? Did Ray?
Much more.
Did they?
Excuse me. Much more has come out in the days since the American people in Congress have been demanding it, but it's coming out in dribs and drabs. Why don't you just release the entire file as you promised to do?
I literally just told you, there are multiple federal court orders. I'm not going to break the law to satisfy your curiosity. You didn't join us when we filed court to release the court orders. You could have. You have lawyers. You could have shown up. You didn't do that.
That's a tiny fraction of the material we're talking about.
That is not.
It is a tiny fraction.
How do you know that? Have you seen everything?
It's all misdirection.
How do you know
The time
that?
of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Leader Jeffries. And I want to say I was alarmed and distressed to read that another January 6th pardoned convict has been picked up, this time apparently in connection with saying he was coming to New York looking for you, Mr. Jeffries, saying he was going to eliminate you. And apparently you had a public event in New York yesterday, and he's been picked up for that. And it's an alarming situation where now we have many of these January 6 defendants who have been picked up on other offenses. The Department of Justice is not zealously prosecuting them for other crimes that they've committed. They've even taken the position that if other crimes were discovered in the course of the January 6 investigation, they were pardoned for those crimes too, which is false, which contradicts the actual text of the pardon. But they are bending over backwards to let these people be out. And it's a very dangerous situation. And I said on the very day that Donald Trump pardoned 1,600 people en masse without obviously studying the details of each individual case, that President Trump and his administration would be responsible for whatever happens with these people. They've got a responsibility to rein them in. Some of them they've hired. Jared Wise, who is a January 6th attendee, he was there on the 6th, and he entered the building illegally, and he also chanted, "Kill him," when his fellow riders were attacking the police. He called the police Nazis and Gestapo. He's now the senior advisor to Ed Martin, who himself was there on January 6th and was a lawyer for people on January 6th. And he tweeted out on that day that it was like Mardi Gras. So
we have a very serious problem with political violence in this country. Thank God that you are safe, Mr. Jeffries, but we are asking for the Department of Justice to get serious about reining these people in all over the country, especially since Ed Martin clearly knows them, and he is head of the so-called weaponization task force. It was my honor and it was my pleasure to be accompanied today by our new colleague, Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva from the great state of Arizona. She accompanied me to the floor. I tried to get recognition. There was no other business today. I was standing directly opposite the acting speaker for the day, Mr. Herodopoulos. The moment the Pledge of Allegiance was over, I asked for recognition because I wanted to move a unanimous consent motion that the Speaker of the House be directed to move on the next legislative day, tomorrow, to swear in Ms. Grijalva, and yet he turned away, he pretended he didn't notice me, and he scurried out of the room, which to me is disgraceful. We need to act on this. Ms. Grijalva's hundreds of thousands of constituents deserve to be represented in Congress. And even during these pro forma sessions, all of us who are members of Congress, including Congresswoman-elect Grijalva, can introduce legislation. But Ms. Grijalva, as I understand it, I'll let her tell you about it, she is not able to do constituent work for her constituents. We are trying to get in touch with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the VA every day on behalf of our constituents. Meantime, she's got constituent requests piling up on a desk, and I'd be very interested to hear you talk, Adelita, about what resources you have and what resources you don't have. But we consider you an elected member of Congress. There's no right or power that's been invoked by Speaker Johnson as to why he continues to refuse to swear her in. So I'm just here to endorse all the demands of our leadership. We should bring Congress back. The Republicans should get back to Washington, and we should restore all of the health care that's been savagely cut by the Republicans' dreadful, awful bill, and we should swear in our new colleague, and we should move forward with the business of the people. I am very pleased to introduce you to Adelita Grijalva, our most newly elected member of Congress who continues to wait to be sworn in.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. McGovern. This bill, which they now call imperfect, contains the single most corrupt provision for legislative self-dealing that anyone in this chamber today has ever voted on. It is such an egregiously corrupt act of legislator self-enrichment and plunder of the taxpayer that not only did every single House Democrat oppose it in the Rules Committee last night, but multiple Republicans were denouncing it, that is, before they were summoned into a side room and instructed to vote for it, which they all proceeded to do. Now they're telling us, vote for it today, and they'll repeal it, well, maybe next week, or maybe the week after that, or maybe before Christmas, they'll repeal it. I've got a solution for you. If you don't like this corrupt provision, don't vote for it today. That will work. This is a great bill. A great bill, that is, if you think 8 Republican U.S. senators should have a right to collect at least $1 million in a jackpot bonanza payoff from the taxpayers simply because they were subject to the exact same rules all other Americans were subject to and are subject to now. And they don't propose to change those rules for anybody else, not for more than 300 million Americans, not for the members of the House of Representatives, not for governors and mayors, but for themselves. They want to deal themselves a special legal privilege. In this Republican class war, Great Gatsby economy where President Trump has made more than $3 billion since he reoccupied the White House, the federal building which he has proceeded to demolish in large part, where millions of Americans face losing their health care and their SNAP benefits. This provision is an affront to our taxpayers, to the rule of law, to everyone who believes. Could I ask for 15 seconds more? It is an affront to everyone who believes that we in public office must be the servants of the people, not the masters of the people who get special legal rights and privileges and multi-million-dollar payoffs. People who think that they have a right to better treatment than everybody else, like Ghislaine Maxwell in their prison camp where she gets room service, puppy time, and special gym privileges.
Gentlelady from Minnesota.